Helena will really do better homework to realize that forced labor is not being practiced at all by any stretch of the imagination. And the complete transformation of China over the past 46 years is not because of forced labor, is not because of the false allegation about IPR violations, for example. So I hope people in Britain and elsewhere should really have a very objective look at China and try to understand.
嗨，欢迎大家来到果果的新闻频道。本期重要看点，您能想象吗？一位西方人权律师手握所谓的证据，直指中国新疆存在严重人权问题，而中方学者的回应更加直接有力。如果你伦敦旁边就是阿富汗，你怎么办？这是一场发生在国际场合的激烈交锋，涉及新疆反恐、乌克兰危机，甚至国家主权。中方代表高志凯教授如何层层拆解、硬核反驳，每一段回应都信息量爆炸，直击西方叙事的盲点与双标。这场辩论远比想象中更加精彩，请看前方发来的报道。
I have my own problems in relation to China, because I think that here is this incredible power, and I think that it doesn't look after its own workers often well. I'm concerned about what happens in Xinjiang province, and I think there are issues about proper compensation of workers, and I don't like the idea of any kind of forced labor. And it surprises me that a nation like China, which is so concerned with doing justice by its many rather than its few, is doing that to any set of workers. So I have concerns about what happens in factories around China, and I have made that very clear. And so I'm a critic of China with regard to how it deals with minorities and how it deals with issues of rights and how it deals with the rule of law. But let's go back to the business of trade. I've always felt that we should keep doors open. I'm not a hawk when it comes to relationships with China. I think that Britain should be having discussions about trade. But I think that we've got to be very clear. And Victor, I suspect that you're going to disagree with me. But there's a difference. But I don't know about whether there's a difference anymore in the United States, but there's a difference in Britain with regard to the commercial world and the state. And the state does not have access into the private matters concerning a company. But you know that your governing body, the Communist Party of China, is able to access at any time, because of the power it wields, it's able at any time to access any kind of information that companies in China might hold in relation to those with whom it's doing trade. And so I do have concerns about whether doing trade with certain kinds of companies that are in China, whether in fact it is going to be deleterious to the national security of Britain. And I know that because of the different cyber invasions that there have been at the hands of China. And so I have concerns about that. And I do think that the door should be open to have continuing discussions with you around the issue of trade. I do think that it's very important that we continue to have close relations because of climate change and the ways in which there can be collaborations around all of that. And there are many different issues in the world where it's so important that a huge nation like China should be part of the great conversation of mankind. But I also have deep concerns about the fact that there isn't that separation of interests as between the private sector and the state of China as it's run by the Communist Party of China.
Victor?
Thank you very much. I listened very carefully to what Helena has to say, and I highly respect her as a person. On the other hand, for the several things she mentioned about, for example, forced labor, I hope Helena will really do better homework to realize that forced labor is not being practiced at all by any stretch of the imagination. And the complete transformation of China over the past 46 years is not because of forced labor, is not because of the false allegation about IPR violations, for example. So I hope people in Britain and elsewhere should really have a very objective look at China and try to understand what are the real driving forces between China's complete transformation? That's number one. Number two is that for people like Helena and all the other distinguished people, I treat all of you with great respect and decency, but we may have difference of opinion. So if you have criticism about China, be very straightforward. But criticism should be for the purpose of trying your best to help China to improve our situation, rather than condemning China, for example, or hold China as the culprit to humiliate it, because that's not constructive. So in that sense, I think when we talk about the trade war or the tariff war, we need to really make a final decision, whether in your heart or in the public, that is, whether you want to protect free trade. I think it's in all of us' interest to protect free trade. China is the largest trading partner with about 140 nations in the world. So we have a vested interest in promoting free trade. And we have a vested interest in telling the United States, telling President Trump and his administration, don't mess with China, don't mess with free trade, don't mess with mankind, don't try to be a hegemon who holds a gun at the head of the other countries and force it into kowtowing to the United States.
But do you see, when you hear the concerns of somebody like Helena Kennedy, do you see that in order to build more global alliance in this trade war and this rivalry with America, China may have to address some of those concerns?
Allow me to emphasize for the record, that is, for all these decades, especially ever since 1978, and I have full knowledge of what China is doing for all these years, every day China is improving itself. Every day China is learning from its experiences, trying to understand why it failed, how it can move forward better. And whereas the United States is worried that they don't have enough enemies in the world, we are always worried that we do not have enough friends in the world. So what we call criticism and self-criticism is treated as a virtue in China. We always criticize ourselves, and we welcome positive, constructive criticism for anyone in the world. What we don't like is false accusation, is accusation without doing the homework, is confounding black and white, for example, and try to accuse China as the culprit, whereas the realities on the ground are completely different. So I think if Helena is really very constructively minded, and the goal is to help China to improve, Helena, you will be my heroine. And I think we will treat you with highest respect and decency. And I hope you will tell everyone you know that China welcomes positive, constructive criticism, but absolutely will fight against any false accusation and ungrounded condemnation.
Victor, you know that I'm a lawyer, but I'm a lawyer who's very much engaged with human rights issues, and I'm afraid I don't have very much truck with the idea that there are no human rights abuses being conducted against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang province, because I've seen too much of the evidence, and I've heard too often from people who have been at the receiving end of persecution and have had to flee that persecution. And so and it's very interesting. Michelle Bachelet, who I think is a very highly respected politician. She was the president of Chile. She's ended up being the head of the Human Rights Commission at the United Nations. And just before she stepped down from that role, in fact, the day before, I think she was rather anxious not to do it before that, because having China involved in international institutions is so important. But she published her report. She had gone to see the Uyghur, to visit Xinjiang province. She went to China with a delegation of independent-minded people, and they wrote a report saying that there were serious human rights abuses. They didn't accept the concept of genocide, but they said that there were serious crimes against humanity taking place against the Uyghur people. Now, this is not some biased outfit. This is not somebody who's working within the Trump administration who, for whatever reasons, have their own problems with China. This was an independent group of people who went there. And so I don't have any doubt about the fact that there are serious human rights abuses there. Now, if China wanted to have conversations about how, are they dealing with terrorism? Do you have collective punishments? Do you punish all of the people there in the ways that I think they are being punished? I'm happy to have those conversations with leading figures in China, but those things do alarm the West. Certainly, the European West. I don't know whether they're causing great concern to either Russia or to the United States at the moment. But people in those countries also care about these issues. And so it seems to me that there's so many things that China could do. It could very easily say, we were trying to deal with, we felt, with terrorism, and it may be that we came down too heavily, and we're going to seek to address all of that, and we would like assistance in doing so. If China, for example, in relation to the Russia-Ukraine war, and which was started undoubtedly by Russia, if China took a position alongside Europe in supporting an end to that war that did justice for the Ukrainian people, then I think that that you would be creating a very different kind of perception of the journey that China is on in trying to address some of these issues. But there's no sign that that President Xi is interested in doing any of that.
Allow me to respond. I listened to you very carefully, Helena. You know, China is a nation with 56 different nationalities. Uyghur is one of the 56 different nationalities. So, to start with, you need to ask a question. Why, first of all the other 55 nationalities are very happy and very quiet, very law-abiding, and prospering together with the transformation in China, and why the Uyghur nationality has some problem? Now, then you also need to ask, what is the real problem involving some of the people in the Uyghur nationality? The reason is very simple. Xinjiang borders with Afghanistan. Just imagine if London borders with Afghanistan, then you will know immediately your risk profile will be completely different. And the 20-year war in Afghanistan, launched by the United States and participated by NATO, is a real thing. Afghanistan is still suffering from the aftermath of the 20-year-old war. And in Xinjiang, do you know, among the Uyghurs, there are people who call for jihad. Jihad against whom? Against China? No. Against the Chinese Communist Party? No. Against the Chinese people? No. Against the people like the Han nationality like me? No. They are calling for jihad against American troops occupying Afghanistan. They are calling for jihad against the NATO soldiers fighting in Afghanistan, including British soldiers. They were on the battleground. They killed the NATO soldiers, American soldiers. Some of them were arrested. Some of them were put into prison in Guantanamo Bay. All this is real. Don't pretend that you do not know. And as a result of that,
I do know.
Allow me to finish. I listened to you very carefully just now without any interruption. Therefore, the spillover of terrorism, radicalization, and extremism from Afghanistan, from those people who want to launch jihad against America, against NATO, against British soldiers, for example, into Xinjiang, is real. It's not pretended. It's not fabricated. If you say, no, China is immune from all these radicalization from Afghanistan into Xinjiang, then you do not know what you are talking about. So that's number one. Now, the second thing is very interesting. While terrorism, extremism, radicalization are what we consider evil forces, do you know what their real ultimate goal is? Their ultimate goal is to split Xinjiang into a separate independent country. They want to take away Xinjiang from China And do you think the 1.4 billion people in China will ever tolerate such a prospect? Someone using whatever means they have at disposal, sometimes being fanned by some Western countries behind them, try to take away Xinjiang, 1/6 of the land mass of China. Now, when you talk about human rights problems, tell me whether you see any country in the world which has a perfect record of human rights. Every country has some problems, different in nature, different in degree, etc. When you say in China you have human rights problems, I agree with you. I want to work with you to see whether these human rights problems can be addressed. But when you say, wow, there are atrocities, there are crimes against humanity, there are other things, for example, you have mass detention of Uyghur people. No, Helena, you do not know what you are talking about. I actually met with the head of the World Uyghur Congress. And I met with the former chairman of the United States Congressional International Religion Committee, for example. Both of them were Uyghurs. We chatted. We can talk. We can exchange views. They know my view is completely different from them. They know they are getting the support. And both of them, actually, very interestingly, are U.S. citizens. They carry U.S. passport. But their goal is to really create a situation where ultimately, according to their version of the truth, that the Uyghurs will have their own homeland. Uyghurs will have their own republic, or Uyghurs will have their caliphate. Now, from Chinese perspective, this mission will never be possible. We will never allow that to be accomplished. So when you say, I support
what about the
Uyghurs,
point about Ukraine?
Ukraine is very simple. From day one, China has been calling for ceasefire, immediate ceasefire. China called Russia to ceasefire, China called on Ukraine to do the ceasefire. Now, people accuse China of siding with Russia and providing support to Russia. Allow me to mention one thing. If China provided weapons to Russia, the war would have been over already. Because if you know that China is the biggest producer of all these weapons of all kinds, etc., if China provides all these things to Russia, it will be one-sided. In addition to all the advantages and the superiorities that Russia...
So are you denying that any Chinese weapons have gone to Russia?
No, there has been no Chinese weapon at all by any stretch of the imagination provided by China to Russia. Because otherwise, Russia would have won the war already. So we need to be very careful. China has been calling for ceasefire from day one. Second point, China has never provided any weapon to Russia. Thirdly, China has been treating Russia and Ukraine on the same footing, meaning we want to create a situation where both of them will need to sit down at the negotiation table. I will not be surprised eventually Beijing may be chosen as the venue for the most important Russian-Ukraine dialogue, maybe participated by Russia, by the United States at the same time.
精彩视频看完了，高志凯教授在对话中坚定地站在中国立场，有力驳斥了西方专家对中国的不实指控。他明确指出，所谓新疆存在强迫劳动和侵犯人权的说法完全不符合事实，强调中国56个民族和谐共处，共同发展新疆地区的稳定与发展成就有目共睹。高志凯教授还指出，新疆面临的真正挑战是恐怖主义和极端主义的渗透，这些威胁源于阿富汗等地区的动荡局势。中国采取的措施是为了维护国家安全和人民福祉，符合国际社会反恐的共同利益。在谈到贸易和知识产权问题时，高志凯强调，中国始终坚持自由贸易原则，是140多个国家和地区的主要贸易伙伴。中国的发展成就得益于自身的改革开放和不断的自我完善，而非西方所污蔑的强迫劳动或知识产权侵权。他呼吁国际社会客观公正地看待中国，摒弃偏见与虚假指控，通过有积极注意的对话促进共同发展。关于乌克兰危机，高志凯重申中国一贯主张停火止战，推动和谈，坚持不向冲突任何一方 提供武器的原则。中国始终是和平解决的积极推动者。他批评一些西方国家和媒体对中国立场的曲解，强调中国致力于构建人类命运共同体，愿意国际社会一道应对全球性挑战。高志凯的回应逻辑清晰，事实充分，展现了中国学者在国际舆论场中的自信与担当，有效维护了国际形象和核心利益。谢谢大家观看，喜欢请点赞、评论加订阅哦，你的支持是我最大的动力。比心，明天见，拜拜，拜拜，拜拜。